He says, "You will recall that my earlier interest was prompted by a question from our air attaché in Washington seeking advice on whether the UK had any black program." So clearly, while we were asking the Americans if they had a secret aircraft that could explain the UFO sightings, the American authorities had been investigating sightings of their own and asking if the British had something that might explain what was seen.
The complete file of Nick's investigation was obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, but the copy of the letter from the Americans is missing. While the Ministry of Defense doesn't deny the letter's existence, they have no explanation for why it has disappeared from Nick Pope's official case file. But in 1993, Nick's remit was clear. He wasn't hired to chase UFOs. He was hired as a layer of protection for Britain's defences.
My job was not to prove the existence of UFOs at all. No, my job was to assess the UFO reports and satisfy myself, and therefore satisfy the department, there was no evidence of any threat, no evidence of anything of any defence significance.
And in this case, although something had clearly penetrated British airspace and passed over two of Britain's key Air Force bases, it had never returned. So the craft, whatever it was not considered a risk to security. Frustratingly for Nick, the case had to be closed. Nick had to write his final report. Just like the Rendlesham case, it would be inconclusive.
Type of craft, unknown. Origin of craft, unknown. Motive of occupants, unknown.
Having eliminated all obvious avenues, Nick was facing an uncomfortable possibility. Could the events of that night have been a real close encounter? Ian Morrison, director of Jodrell Bank Observatory, ran the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, a project better known as SETI.
UFOs are interesting things. I mean, they basically mean unidentified flying object, and there are lots and lots and lots of those. That's no problem. The real question is a UFO an alien spacecraft? Now, my own feeling is that so far we have not had any alien spacecraft visiting the Earth. That is not to say it cannot be done. It's very difficult, but it's not impossible. In fact, to be honest, I suspect we will come in contact with another being by that route, direct contact, rather than by picking up signals from across the galaxy.
Nick Pope left his desk at the Secretariat of Air Staff 2A in 1994 to take up another post within the Ministry of Defence. He had done his job to evaluate and assess events of any defence significance. But he had failed to find the rational explanation he had hoped for. This case had really got under his skin.
I conducted this investigation with a completely open mind. I wanted to solve the case, just as I wanted to solve all UFO sightings that I investigated. But at the end of the day, I was forced to say that none of the usual explanations added up. This was some sort of exotic craft of unknown origin. I didn't know what it was.
For 10 years, Nick Pope lived with the uneasy feeling that this case left with him. But officially, there was nothing he could do. Then the introduction of the Freedom of Information Act revealed, for the very first time, the full extent of Nick's investigation. And lurking within the records, the MOD's equivalent of the X-Files, was a summary of his investigation, written for and approved by Nick's MOD superiors.
There's a statement here which is, I think, quite unprecedented in the MOD's X-Files, and it says, in summary, there would seem to be some evidence on this occasion that an unidentified object or objects of unknown origin was operating over the UK.
It is possibly the most telling official statement ever made about a UFO incident in Britain. A top-level acknowledgement that there was some evidence of an unidentified flying object. These were Nick's bosses, senior-level MOD personnel, putting their signature to the fact that this was a genuine UFO. Nick's investigation had been methodical and meticulous, and now he knew that it had been taken very seriously at the highest levels of the government and military. The quality of the witnesses and the evidence he gathered did more than just convince his superiors. It convinced him. He'd turned from skeptic to believer.
Could it have been extraterrestrial? When we look at the speeds and manoeuvres of this craft, which go way beyond anything we have, I think there's some intriguing evidence to point towards that. This was not a misidentification of any conventional object or phenomena. It wasn't some secret prototype craft. It was a genuine UFO, a real unknown. Could it have been extraterrestrial? Yes, it could.
Whatever was in the British skies on the night of March the 30th, 1993, wasn't just unidentifiable. It was undeniable.
Next tonight, our Perfect Day trilogy continues with The Wedding. There's more on that in just a moment.